This podcast episode is sponsored by Geekdom, San Antonio's entrepreneurship hotspot and co-working space. Whether you need one-time recurring office space or event space, Geekdom has it all. Use code Social Butterfly when signing up for a membership to receive $25 off of monthly membership. Welcome back to Unapologetically Visible, the podcast for high-achieving Latina and women of color founders who are done being the best kept secret. I'm your host, Christina Olivarez, award-winning leadership and visibility coach, TEDx speaker, and founder and CEO of the Social Butterfly Gal and Hustle and Socialize. How do you know it's time to invest in a coach? That is a question that you often ask yourself privately, first in your mind, in your thoughts. And I've heard this from so many clients or just people that come to ask me, I know that I need to make a shift. I could feel it in my body. I could feel it in my spirit, but I think I'm just really scared in actually making the jump. If you resonate with this is exactly what today's episode is going to be all about, because I really want to have an honest conversation with you today about the obvious yet overlooked signs that it's time to hire me as your coach, because I feel a lot of high achieving women misunderstand what that season actually looks like when you know that you need to make a change and you know that you can't do this alone, but you are definitely terrified about the investment and making that investment, which somebody actually offered this incredible reframe around the investment that you're making is a big write-off at the end of the year. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about why, too, most people assume that it's when you're investing in high-level coaching, it's because everything is falling apart. And that's not necessarily true. When you start thinking about making an investment in coaching, or particularly when women who usually hire me, they're not in that position at all. Maybe sometimes they do feel like their business is falling apart, that the revenue is collapsing. But a lot of the times it's that you're ready to make a fully embodied identity shift and a recalibration in the way that people are experiencing you and your brand. Most of my clients, a lot of them, are already well established and accomplished. Their businesses have been functioning for quite a while now. They have built that credibility, so they're respected. And that's where they kind of feel that underneath all of these accolades and underneath all of the big reputation that they have created over the many years of being in business, underneath all of that, they usually find themselves in a very quieter tension that happens in their bodies and in the way that they are exuding their presence. And it's something that they don't often talk about because, yes, it's very uncomfortable when you are in the middle of a transition or a new chapter or a new era. There's a lot of grief involved. There is a lot of shedding. It is not the most comfortable thing on the planet. And a lot of my clients, they have really great visibility. And so they're starting to recognize that their visibility it doesn't really fully reflect the depth of who they are now as a founder, as a leader. And so the opportunities are there, but they feel very underutilized. I always like to say that this is where you might feel like the best kept secret, because you know that all of these things that you've done have produced really great work, but still your business is feeling very heavy and it's not something that you're quite used to. And that is really what this conversation is going to be about today. I know there are many of you who are listening to this episode right now who have become incredibly skilled at functioning inside misalignment. And privately, you know that something about the way that you're operating right now, the way you're leading, the way you're showing up, or maybe just how you're sustaining your business, it no longer feels sustainable for the next level that you're trying to step into. And I know many of my clients, they're wanting that peace, that ease, that freedom, that flexibility. And sometimes the businesses that we often create are not sustainable long term. We can feel it. We can feel that shift. And I feel what makes this even harder is that high functioning women are really incredibly great at dismissing their own need for support. If you think back to it, generations upon generations, many of our ancestors do not like asking for help. They want to be the ones that are going to figure it out on your own. They are wanting to, hustle and do all the work. But a lot of the times, you need a strategic partner. You need somebody that is going to give you that tough love. And you need somebody who's going to be your mirror and to hold and to be a stand for your vision. And so in today's episode, I want to take you through my own experience of navigating this kind of identity and leadership recalibration and how I made the decision that it was time to invest top dollar in a coach that I've been working with for over 3 years. And then I want to talk about the patterns that I consistently see in the women who come into my world in private coaching or VIP days or in an intensive. And I want to walk you through the obvious yet overlooked signs that it's actually time for deeper support, sharper recalibration, and a very different level of leadership. So I want to take you back to 2021, 2022. That was when I was in the middle of a massive identity recalibration. I was already maybe 6, 7 years in business at that point, and I was transitioning out of social media management and rebranding my company into more coaching. And at that time, with the second business that I co-owned at the time, my business partner was leaving the company and I knew that I was going to have to take over it. I was already pursuing legal ownership of 100%. And so I knew that I was standing at this very massive identity recalibration where I felt like this was so much deeper than just a rebrand or a pivot. My relationship with my own visibility was changing massively. And I feel like my standards were also changing. The way I was holding myself as a leader was really rapidly changing at a very large rate. And I knew that the rooms that I really wanted to be in were changing. I had built a very strong reputation around being the go-to person for social media strategy and community building. And I was deeply grateful for that chapter because it shaped so much of who I am today and also provided the awards and the accolades to prove that my frameworks and the strategies that I was building were tried, tested, and proven, which is all of the basics of how I build my frameworks today. But I knew that there came a point where I could just feel very clearly that the work that I was doing no longer fully reflected the depth of the conversations I wanted to have or the level of transformation that I wanted to facilitate. And that realization was deeply uncomfortable because externally, my brand looked amazing. I was really sort of moving on up, if you will, with my revenue. I was getting clients and people knew me as social media, social butterflies, gal, social media. It was just a thing. But I knew that I was meant for so much more. And I think that's one of the hardest things for many high achieving women to do is just recognizing that it's time for a shift. And I knew that it was time for me to look for and invest in a coach that was going to help me get to where I needed to be. I had invested many times before. I was no stranger to investing. I do feel like if this is your first time investing, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I would say is you got to get really, really clear on what your ROI that you want for yourself. Because there's a lot of people that I've worked with, and even me investing in a coach, there's very vague ROI, or you kind of just don't know exactly what you really want. I'm here to tell you that it's important to get super crystal clear on the transformation that you want to have, because that makes finding a coach or relating to a coach much more better in the process. And I knew for me, one of the things that I really needed to confront was I realized that I wanted my next level of leadership and visibility and business to reflect who I actually was becoming. And at that time, I had already expanded my brand nationally with my TEDx talk. And I knew that it was time for me to get out. I love San Antonio, don't get me wrong, but it was time for me to get out of my comfort zone in San Antonio. And so I did a crazy thing, an impulse thing, which was I wanted to be in proximity to a coach that I had been following for a long time on social media. And I bought a ticket to a conference in LA 1 month before the event. And I was determined to sit at this coach's table and make it known of who I was and the level that I'm operating at and the sort of next level that I wanted to get. And a month after that conference, I made the decision to invest in her coaching. And it was at that moment that I knew that I had to go all in. Over the 3.5 years that I've been working with her, I've invested close to $25,000 to $30,000 in my own growth. And it's beautiful to see because she recently posted a video of me on Instagram from the time that I had just met her when I sat at her table in 2022 and to all of the things that I've done from that moment up until now. And there was 2 or 3 things that I recognized from that video was number one, I'm so damn proud that I went all in and betted on myself and decided to invest close to $25,000 to $30,000 on my growth. Because at the end of the day, yes, her coaching it matters and the work that she does matters, but it matters more because I made a commitment to myself. I put in the work. I was doing all these things. And I think that's where so many people kind of get misconnected or disconnected with the results of what they want to have from a coach, because the coach is going to be there to guide you, to ask hard questions, to maybe give you strategy. But at the end of the day, you got to do the work. You got to put in the reps. And I think that video really showed me just the progress that I've made that sometimes we cancel out. But at the same time, I realized that I still have more to go. And I think you might feel the exact same way because every identity evolution, right? It requires letting go of a version of yourself that once felt safe and validated, understood, and successful, which is why I had to go all in and invest in a coach for me because I knew that I was at a different stage in my business where I had to refine and recalibrate everything. I had to refine my messaging, my voice, my positioning, the way I showed up and entered in rooms, finding different opportunities that were going to stretch me and also grieve a lot of who I was back then, who I am now, and who I'm becoming. And that is why I know that it's important to find people that you know, like, and trust. And for me, I know what it's like navigating your business and a business transition alone and also with a strategic partner. And I will say, making an investment in a coach, especially one that you consume all their content, that you are building a trust relationship with, there's nothing that compares to that, especially when you finally get to meet your coach face to face, when you get the opportunity to have all of the things that you have been working on and you actually achieve those results, nothing compares. And I feel like sometimes a lot of you are quietly getting stuck because you keep trying to optimize that old identity instead of allowing yourself to fully evolve into a new one. Because absolutely, it is scary, right? You're putting all of the eggs in this one basket and you're like, is this going to work? I always tell clients that if you believe in yourself, if you know and you trusted yourself, then yes, it's going to work. Because why wouldn't it work? If you are fully committed to the process, if you are committed to yourself, if you trust yourself fully, then it's going to work because you know how to bet on yourself. And one of the biggest patterns that I see in women who come into my world, especially in private coaching, is many of these women are super accomplished and they are respected and they have all these accolades and they've built great success for them already. But underneath all of that capability is a very private exhaustion that they don't always feel safe admitting. Because the truth is, there's a very specific kind of loneliness that can come with being the woman who is always expected to have it all together. A lot of high achieving women become deeply accustomed to carrying that emotional, strategic, financial, and psychological responsibility for everyone around them. And after years of operating in that role, they become so practiced at carrying pressure that they stop questioning whether the pressure itself is sustainable. Instead, many of you normalize it. I know that the women who hire me, especially in private coaching, they're asking a very deeper question. Is this the level of support my next season actually requires? Once a woman reaches a specific level of leadership, she often does not need more information. I know many of you right now are consuming more information, more content, avoidance. You're avoiding the actual thing that is going to move the needle. What you need is not more information. What you need is refinement, sharper truth, cleaner lens. You need support seeing the patterns that you cannot see from inside of your own proximity. And that's why it's important to have a space where you no longer have to perform every second of the day. Which brings me to the obvious yet overlooked signs that it's time to hire me as your coach. There are about 6 signs that I'm going to walk you through today that I often see my clients coming to me with before we start working, or just some of the patterns that I've often seen my clients have before they enter my world. So the first sign is when your business is still functioning, but it no longer feels like it fits the woman or the founder that you're becoming. This is such an emotionally complicated season for you because maybe there's not necessarily anything wrong externally to justify making the necessary changes. You might still have a lot of revenue coming in, or your audience may still love you. Your offers still technically work, but internally you feel friction everywhere. And this could be because you are entering a new chapter of your life or a new era in your business. And quite oftentimes, the friction that happens when you're in that season is you know that you have to be making some changes to fit the person that you're becoming, but you don't know exactly what step to take. You may notice that sometimes your content may feel a little heavier, or selling feels more emotionally draining. Maybe your visibility feels a little bit more performative instead of expansive. And you start realizing that your business still reflects an earlier version of that identity while maintaining the other version. It's going to start costing you emotionally, especially if you're in that middle of the recalibration season. So this is where you know you need to make a shift and you're wondering how. The second sign is when you're getting visibility opportunities, but you're still a little disconnected because you're overextending yourself on those visibility opportunities. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with clients who come to me in private coaching that are like, I want more speaking opportunities. I want more opportunities to be on stage and to do all this. And they have all that momentum, but they are not getting compensated for these opportunities. And there is, of course, levels to that compensation for your visibility. Quite often, when you're first beginning, you want to take those opportunities as much as you can to build your portfolio, to start gaining the traction. But now you're starting to realize, okay, I'm getting all of these opportunities and I'm burning myself out because I don't know how to say no. Or I feel like if I say no, those opportunities would stop coming. And so everybody can see that there's momentum in your brand, but you know that right now you really need to get compensated. And that means that it's time to raise the bar in how you are seen in your authority and at the level of compensation that you deserve for your authority. The third sign is when you keep consuming more information, but the real issue is that you no longer fully trust your own leadership and decision making. I have a lot of clients who I work with that struggle with decision making. They struggle with trusting themselves and their decisions that they're making when it comes to their business, when it comes to even just the systems and the processes that they're building for specific offers and the way that they market. This is incredibly important because we often think that we need more strategy around our maybe things are not working because we don't have that strategy. And 9 out of the 10 times, a lot of it is just self trust issues. Many of my clients sometimes often convince themselves that they just need one more thing, one more framework, one more tweak, one more answer. But the deeper issue is that they become very overly externally referenced, and every decision becomes filtered through pressure, fear, perception, validation, or performance instead of the truth. And so many of the clients that I work with often second guess their decisions. They tend to overthink. And in my coaching, we focus on creating filters around that process and really looking inward and building trust within yourself. The fourth sign is when your content sounds great, but it's no longer translating the depth of your authority, intelligence, or your lived experience. Nowadays, we can go to AI to get the answers that we want. We could go to ChatGPT or Claude and build out a content strategy or find some type of answer. But what I do really believe is people want to work with you, not just because you could spit out information and you can teach and you can, go at step by step, but there is this nuance between like lived experience and wisdom and building know like trust within your clientele and why they want to work with you. And I feel that there's a lot of women that underestimate how emotionally painful that sort of being in that season is where you're no longer translating the depth of your brand of who you are and your content starts becoming very over polished because you don't necessarily feel good about sharing some of your story, some of your lived experience. I worked with a client recently whose sales had became dramatically cleaner after we refined her positioning and her messaging. Not only did she really expand in her visibility, but because she was sharper in how she was sort of calling in her ideal clients, she started really making more consistent sales. And you can definitely see the difference between when she first started working with me up until now, because she is getting those speaking opportunities. She's closing at a faster rate. She's closing higher contracts, which is something that she really wanted to do. And that's what happens when calibrated visibility is put at the forefront of your strategy. The fifth sign is when you secretly know you've outgrown your current business model, positioning, or way of operating, but you keep trying to force yourself to make it work anyway. This is one of the clearest indicators that a woman is entering a new season of leadership. She can feel herself evolving really fast internally, but instead of restructuring her business accordingly, she keeps trying to squeeze her evolution into old containers because letting go feels risky. There's always going to be a risk involved in entrepreneurship and business. And when you make a decision to pause on a specific business model or shift your business model, there is a perceived risk. There is things that you feel are going to be very detrimental to the way that people perceive you, but also just in the way that you are creating and building your business. And finally, one of the deepest signs, which is the sixth sign, is when you've become highly functional in survival mode and people assume you're fine and you're still producing. This one hits hard because productivity can hide the misalignment for many, many years. You can build a respected business and brand while privately feeling very emotionally exhausted. You can continue to show up for everyone while quietly resenting how much emotional labor your business requires from you. You can maintain that level of visibility while internally grieving how disconnected you feel from your own work. Eventually, your nervous system starts resisting the life your business currently requires you to maintain. And that's usually when women begin searching for deeper support because they are finally honest with themselves enough to admit that the next level of leadership cannot be built through chronic overfunctioning. It has to be sustainable. So, if you've been listening to this episode and you're quietly recognizing yourself in any of these signs, any of these conversations that we've been having, I want you to understand something very, very clearly. You probably already know that it's time. You already know if your business feels heavier than it should. You already know your visibility no longer reflects your authority. And you already know you're emotionally exhausted from carrying that leadership alone. You know that you have outgrown those structures. And so the question is not whether you are aware. The question is whether you're finally ready to stop carrying all of this alone. And if that is where you realize, okay, Christina, I really believe now is the time. I want to invite you to work one on one with me in my private coaching program. This work is for the woman who understands that her next level requires deep recalibration. The women who come into my world know that they are ready for cleaner positioning, stronger self trust, sharper leadership, sustainable visibility, and a strategic partner that is going to reflect the level that you are operating at. This is not surface level coaching. It is deep refinement work for women whose businesses no longer accurately reflect the depth of who they become. So if this episode felt personal, emotionally exposing, or strangely revealing at the same time, I want you to trust that feeling, because sometimes the clearest sign that it's time for support is realizing how tired you are of trying to hold it together. If you resonated with this episode, here's what I want you to do next. Subscribe and leave a review, because that helps this podcast reach more women like us, women who are never meant to stay hidden, women who are meant to be highly visible leaders. Share this episode with someone you love who is really craving for one-on-one support and is in need of a leadership and visibility coach like me to help them get to their next level. And if you're feeling the call to go deeper, to recalibrate your personal brand, leadership, and your visibility, I would love to support you through one-on-one coaching, especially in private coaching. You can find the coaching information and offers in the links in the show notes below, or send me a DM on Instagram at the Social Butterfly Gal with the word coaching, and I will personally walk you through what offers are in alignment with your current season and what it looks like to step into this next era with clarity, confidence, and unapologetic authority. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening and for all of the shares and reviews. Remember this: you didn't come this far to play safe. You came here to be unapologetically visible. I'll see you next week.